What would you do if an HOA locked the only legal road to your own home? I just wanted to drive home, until the HOA put a steel gate across the only legal road to my land. They didn't know the easement my parents left me was stronger than every rule they'd ever written. And when I discovered their whole community was running utilities across my property, everything changed. That's when I stood my ground and let the law speak for me. The late afternoon sun hung low over Crystal Pines Lake, turning the water into a sheet of hammered silver. I had driven this same winding mountain road for nearly my entire life, long before the cabins appeared, long before the lakeside community with its manicured lawns and matching mailboxes took root. But that day, the air felt different, still expectant, like the woods were holding their breath. My tires hummed across the familiar asphalt until I reached the last bend, the one that always opened to a clean view of the lake and the straight shot up to my ranch. Except the view wasn't open anymore. I pressed the brakes without thinking. A massive wrought iron gate rose in front of me, black and shining, anchored into fresh concrete like a jaw snapping shut. It stretched from one side of the road to the other, tall enough to block the sky behind it. Someone had bolted a metal sign to the center. Private access. HOA residents only. There was no mistaking the message. Someone decided that the road that had carried my family for 4 decades suddenly belonged to them. I rolled down the window. The mountain air should have been crisp, pine-scented, peaceful. Instead, it tasted like metal. Then I heard heels. Bethany Reed stepped out from the left side of the gate like she'd been waiting for her cue. Her bright pink blazer stood out against the pines like a flare. She held a clipboard tucked tight under one arm and pointed at me the way a traffic cop points at a car that just ran a red light. Her expression was carved from pure irritation, an HOA queen surveying an unwanted visitor. Behind her, leaning against an official-looking SUV, was Jake Mercer, the community's self-appointed security officer. He was mid-40s, thick-shouldered, sunglasses on even though the sun was behind the ridge. His hand rested casually on his belt, like he expected trouble or wanted me to think he did. I opened my door and stepped out slowly, boots crunching gravel. "Afternoon," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What's this?" Bethany tilted her chin, lips tight. "This," she said, patting the gate like it was a prize racehorse, "is a necessary measure to protect our residents. From now on, this road is restricted to HOA-approved vehicles only." I stared at her, then at the sign, then at the gate again, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. "This is the only road to my ranch," I said. "You know that." She gave a shrug so polished it almost sparkled. "You'll need to find another route, Mr. Cole. The community has voted on this." Shock settled in me first, thick and cold, but anger followed fast, rising like heat off sunburned skin. I stepped closer. "Who gave you the right to close a road that belongs to me?" Bethany smiled, small and sharp. "We did." The words hung in the air, absurd and unbelievable. A pine branch creaked overhead as if the whole forest winced for me. For a moment, none of us spoke. Jake's sunglasses reflected my own stunned face back at me, jaw tight, brow pulled, breath gone shallow. "This road predates your community by decades," I said slowly. "Long before that gate. Long before any of your cabins touched this mountain. You can't just—" "We can," she said, cutting clean through my sentence. "And we have." She tapped the gate again, as if to prove it existed. Somewhere beyond us, a kayak skimmed across the lake. Birds chirped. A breeze rustled the tops of the tall pines. But down here on the asphalt, everything felt still and wrong. My road, the road my father drove long before Bethany Reed ever discovered manicured mountain living, was locked behind iron bars. Jake finally spoke, voice low. "Rules are rules, sir." I studied both of them. They weren't bluffing. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary construction detour. They had installed a full steel gate system, keypad and all, without warning, without paperwork, without so much as a courtesy conversation. Shock turned to something heavier. Disbelief mixed with a flicker of alarm. Not fear exactly, but the sense that something enormous had shifted beneath my feet. "Bethany," I said, "this road legally predates your community. Did you even check the property records?" She waved dismissively. "We handle our own infrastructure, and our residents expect privacy." Her tone made it clear. She wasn't just acting with authority, she was enjoying it. I took a breath, held it, then let it out slow. Growing up out here teaches you to measure anger like you measure rainfall. Too much, too fast, and things break. Too little, and nothing grows. "Move the gate," I said. "Now." She laughed, light, quick, dismissive. "No." I stepped closer to the bars, gripping one with my hand. The metal was still warm from installation. Fresh weld marks glittered along the base. It hadn't been here long, but it was solid, heavy, deliberate, meant to send a message. Jake straightened slightly as he watched, but didn't move. I let go of the iron and turned back to Bethany. "This isn't over." "Oh, I know it isn't," she said sweetly. "Which is why I suggest you prepare a proposal if you want access. Cooperation is easier than conflict." Behind her, the luxurious lake shimmered. Kayaks drifted lazily. Smoke curled from a chimney of one of the high-end cabins the HOA loved to brag about. Everything looked peaceful from a distance. Quiet, orderly, perfect. But up close, the gate cast a long shadow across the road. I got back into my truck. My hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles pale. I looked at the gate one more time, memorizing the shape of it. The arrogance stitched into every welded line. They thought they could take my road. They thought they could decide its fate. They thought the mountain listened to their bylaws. As I backed up slowly, gravel crunching under my tires, I felt the shock cooling into something steadier, something sharper. A quiet, rising anger that didn't flare or roar, but settled deep, like coals beginning to glow. The question echoed through my mind. Why did the HOA dare to gate a road that legally predates their entire community? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew I'd find out. The truck eased into reverse until I found a wide enough shoulder to turn around. The mountains stood quiet above me, their silhouettes darkening against the falling sun, as if the ridge itself were watching, waiting, holding judgment. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, breath steady, listening to the faint lap of lake water against the rocks. It was the same sound I'd grown up with, the sound that used to mean home. Now it sounded like a warning. I pulled away from the gate slowly, letting the road unwind beneath my tires the way it had for decades. Even as a kid, riding in my father's old Ford, I could trace every bend of this stretch from memory. The road was carved into my bones as much as the land was carved into my family history. My father used to say that roads weren't just paths, they were promises. A promise that you belonged somewhere, a promise that you could always return. Halfway down the mountain, I stopped the truck at the overlook. The air was cooler there, sharper, scented with pine sap and the faint mineral bite of lake mist. I stepped out and leaned against the hood, staring out at the land that had shaped every year of my life. 40 acres of rugged slopes, glimmering shoreline, and tangled forest. My inheritance. My responsibility. My parents bought that land in the early 80s, when Crystal Pines was nothing but a name on a USGS map, and the lake was a quiet secret only a few ranchers knew. They'd driven cross-country in a battered station wagon, with barely enough savings to buy a house, much less a property. But when my mother saw the stretch of lake reflecting morning light, she said she felt the place breathing. She told my father, "This is where we grow roots." And they did. Our first winter in the cabin was rough. You could feel the wind push through the walls like a living thing. But we never left. Dad cleared the first path to the main road himself, hauling rocks and leveling earth with a shovel and grit. When Old Man Fletcher, the original landowner next door, noticed my father digging, he walked over with a thermos of hot coffee and said, "Son, use my road instead. It's already cut, and it'll save you a year of back-breaking labor." Dad tried to pay him. Fletcher refused. Instead, he drafted a formal easement, recorded with the county, giving my parents and all future owners permanent and unrestricted access to that road. "One day folks will build things they shouldn't," he'd said, "and you'll be glad this is in writing." Turns out he wasn't just right. He was prophetic. I drove the rest of the way home with the memory of that conversation echoing through my mind. It wasn't just a path carved through dirt and stone. It was a legal lifeline, written in ink, stamped, filed, immutable. And the HOA? They were playing pretend with iron and arrogance. When I reached the ranch, the old cabin stood quiet, the golden reflection of the lake dancing across its windows. The boards creaked under my boots as I stepped onto the porch. Even after years of repairs, the place still held the soul of my childhood. The smell of split pine, the faded paint on the railing where my father leaned during summer evenings, the rusted nail near the doorframe my mother warned me not to touch. Inside, I set my keys down and pulled open a drawer that groaned with age. Papers, maps, deeds, all the things most people forget about until they need them. But out here, land isn't just owned, it's defended. I found the easement documents, yellowed around the edges, the signatures still dark and sure. Permanent easement, non-revocable, appurtenant, and then the part most people never notice: utility rights, water, electricity, future communications lines, all allowed, all protected, all binding. A sudden breeze slipped through the cracked window, making the papers flutter like wings. I placed my hand on them, anchoring them to the wood. The weight of history pressed against my palm. Not just ink and legal terms, but my parents' trust, their foresight, their stubborn determination to build something lasting. I stepped back outside, letting the porch boards creak beneath me again. The lake glittered in the fading light like a quiet ally. The mountain shadows stretched long across the valley, dark but protective. Even the wind felt like it carried the voices of the people who lived here before me. "They should have read the fine print," I murmured. The quiet turned heavy then, heavier than the gate, heavier than Bethany's smug smile. Something in my gut twisted, not fear, but recognition. This wasn't just a disagreement. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a push, a slow, creeping pressure that would only grow stronger if I didn't root myself in the truth right now. I tightened my jaw. If the HOA wanted a fight, they'd chosen the wrong mountain, the wrong landowner, the wrong easement, the wrong coal. I looked back toward the road, the image of that new iron gate searing itself into my memory. I didn't know their full motive yet. I didn't know how far they'd go, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a mistake. It was a move. A deliberate, calculated move from people who believed the rules bent around them. But the land didn't bend. And neither did I. A faint roll of thunder echoed somewhere above the ridge, like distant approval or distant warning. I couldn't tell which. The day dimmed into blue twilight as I stepped back into the cabin. The floorboards sighed under my weight. Outside, the lake whispered against the shore, a calm surface hiding a growing storm. And in that moment, I whispered back, "You picked the wrong road to close." The next morning broke with a soft haze drifting off the lake, the sun rising slowly behind the pines. It should have been peaceful. It usually was. Dew on the railing, the call of loons across the water, the smell of damp earth warming in the light. But even before I finished my first cup of coffee, I felt it. A shift in the air. Something tight, artificial. Like someone took the quiet of the mountain and stretched it too thin. By the time I got into my truck and eased back toward the access road, I noticed the first sign of trouble. Not big, not obvious, but intentional. A pile of gravel sat in the center of the easement, too neatly dumped to be an accident. It forced me to slow to a crawl, inching my way around the edge, tires skirting the ditch. I rolled my window down and leaned out. The gravel smelled fresh, damp from last night's rain. It hadn't been here yesterday. Someone wanted me to know they'd been busy. I drove on, jaw tight. If they thought little stunts like that would make me turn around, they didn't know me at all. At the bottom of the road, near the bend where the pine shadows met the asphalt, 2 construction trucks idled, blocking half the easement. Workers in bright vests pretended not to see me. One held a clipboard, another leaned on a shovel. The moment my truck approached, they suddenly found the art of slow motion. Walking slower, talking slower, moving equipment at a pace that would embarrass glacial drift. I honked lightly. Nothing. I leaned out. "Morning, fellas. Need to get through." They exchanged a look, one of those glances people share when they've been coached but don't want to admit it. "We'll move in a minute," the taller one said, tapping his watch though he wasn't wearing one. "Just doing our job." A minute stretched into 5, then 7. Eventually, grudgingly, they shifted just enough for me to squeeze through. As I passed, the shorter worker lifted his phone, not calling anyone, just filming. The lens followed me the entire way. I stared back until he lowered it. Inside the community proper, everything looked polished and perfect. Freshly watered lawns, trimmed hedges, lakefront decks with decorative lanterns. But beneath that perfect surface was something sour. Homeowners stood on their porches, arms folded, eyes narrowed. One woman whispered to another while pointing at me, like I was some kind of trespasser in a place I'd grown up in long before she ever saw a brochure. Then came the sound of heels. Bethany appeared from behind a manicured walkway, clipboard in hand, her pink blazer bright enough to stand out among the muted cabins. She had 2 board members trailing her, each holding a stack of documents they didn't seem to understand. She raised a hand, stopping me the way someone stops a dog on a leash. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice smooth as lemon polish. "We were hoping to speak with you today." "I wasn't," I replied, keeping the window down. Her smile tightened. "We've been reviewing the situation with the road, and the HOA board has agreed it is in everyone's best interest to formalize an arrangement." "Formalize an arrangement," I repeated, tasting the words. The male board member stepped forward nervously. "We're prepared to offer compensation for your easement access. Fair compensation." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew it would be insulting. Bethany lifted her chin. $10,000. I laughed, not loudly, just a single breath shaped like disbelief. "That wouldn't cover gravel for a mile of new road." "We're not responsible for your construction costs," she said, tapping her clipboard. "We're offering goodwill. You should consider it. Your presence on this road is disruptive to the community's harmony." "Harmony," I echoed. Funny word for closing a man's only access. The other board member cleared his throat. "If you choose not to cooperate, Mr. Cole, the HOA reserves the right to regulate traffic. Excessive use of the road may result in fines." This time, I didn't laugh. I just stared at them, letting the silence grow long enough to make them shift nervously. "You can't fine me for driving on my own easement," I said. Bethany stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you don't work with us, things will get harder for you." There it was, the truth peeking through the politeness. I straightened in my seat. "You don't want hard, Bethany, believe me." Her expression flickered, but only for a second. Then she glanced at Jake Mercer, standing near his SUV across the road. He watched us like a hawk, arms folded, sunglasses reflecting the rising sun. "We're trying to avoid conflict," Bethany said, "but this community runs on cooperation." "No," I said. "It runs on bylaws you made, not laws that existed long before you." She didn't like that. Her jaw tightened, her fingers curling just slightly around the clipboard. But she kept smiling. The tight, brittle kind that cracks the moment pressure hits. I shifted the truck into drive. "Move the gate," I said quietly, "or this will go further than you want." Bethany didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes told me she believed she held the power here, that the HOA controlled the mountain, the road, the rules, the future, but the land knew better. As I rolled away, I heard Jake mutter under his breath, not meant for me, but loud enough in the quiet morning air. "If he won't cooperate, we'll make him." A shiver crawled up my spine, not from fear, but from clarity. They were starting something they couldn't possibly finish. They thought this was a neighborhood squabble, a matter of preference or compliance. They didn't understand yet. This wasn't about convenience. This wasn't about rules. This was about rights, written, recorded, permanent. And if they wanted a quiet war, they'd get one. Because the land was patient. But I wasn't passive, and the next move would be theirs, a move I knew wouldn't be subtle. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after that exchange with Bethany and Jake, the mountain turned hot and dry, the kind of weather where every sound carries farther than it should. I spent the morning repairing a loose board on the dock, listening to the lake lap against the posts, trying to shake the feeling that something was tightening around me, inch by inch. Birds moved differently in the trees. The wind felt cautious somehow, brushing the surface of the water as if it sensed the tension. By late afternoon, a storm gathered on the far ridge, dark clouds rolling in behind the peaks like a curtain being drawn. I packed up my tools, wiped lake spray from my arms, and headed for the truck, planning a quick trip to town before the rain hit. Halfway down the mountain road, I knew something was wrong. Not because of a sound, not because of a sign, but because the air itself felt still. Too still, like the breath before a door slams shut. Then I saw it. The gate. No longer half-installed, no longer guarded like a half-finished project. It stood fully completed, towering, heavy, proud, sealed in place with thick steel posts sunk into new concrete. The wrought iron shimmered in the dimming light, forming dark bars that stretched from shoulder to sky. And in the center, blinking like a smug eye, was a keypad access panel. My truck slowed to a crawl as I rolled toward it. The keypad lights flickered from red to blue and back again, waiting for a code I'd never been given. A laminated sign fluttered slightly in the wind. "Authorized HOA vehicles only. Access restricted." I braked, stepped out, and walked toward it, gravel shifting under my boots. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, not fast, not panicked, but heavy. The kind of heartbeat a rancher gets when he finds a fence cut or a barn door hanging open. I grabbed one of the cold iron bars and pulled. It didn't budge. I shook it harder. Still nothing. The damn thing was built like a bank vault. I looked around. No workers, no trucks, no warning. Just the mountain, the trees, and a gate someone had decided belonged here. I stepped back, hands on my hips, staring at the obstacle that had no legal right to exist. The easement, my easement, clearly stated access must remain unobstructed. But this wasn't obstruction. This was blockade, a deliberate attempt to cut me off from my own land. The wind picked up then, the first breath of the storm rolling down from the ridge. Pine branches rustled, carrying the smell of ozone. Clouds darkened the road until the gate cast a long, jagged shadow across my boots. I took my phone out and dialed Bethany. Straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. By the fourth call, I wasn't surprised anymore. She wouldn't pick up. People don't answer when they know they're wrong, or when they know the fallout is coming. I turned back to the gate and leaned both hands on the bars. My reflection stared back at me, jaw clenched, hair ruffled by the wind. Man standing on the wrong side of something illegal and arrogant. There was no backup route, no side trail, no secret access carved through the forest. This was it. My only road. The road my father drove. The road protected by deed and easement. The road now stolen behind iron. A rumble of thunder rolled closer, echoing along the valley. I realized then that going back up the mountain wasn't optional. It was necessary. But without the road, there was only one path left. I parked the truck on the shoulder, grabbed my backpack from behind the seat, and stepped into the trees. The forest swallowed me in seconds. Branches brushed my shoulders, damp soil clung to my boots, and the slope rose steep and unforgiving. The storm moved faster than I expected. Wind whipping between trunks, leaves fluttering like frantic hands. My breath grew heavier as the trail vanished beneath underbrush, and I climbed over fallen logs slick with moss. Halfway up, the sky cracked open. Cold rain hammered the canopy, dripping through gaps and turning the ground into mud. I slipped twice, catching myself on roots, each stumble sending a jolt through my legs. Thunder boomed overhead, rolling across the lake like a warning shot. My clothes soaked through until they clung to me, heavy and cold. By the time I reached my property line, I was drenched, scraped, exhausted, and furious. The storm eased slightly as I walked across the clearing toward the cabin. Water ran in small streams along the path. Mud splashed with every step. My breath came out in white puffs against the sudden chill. Inside, I set my backpack down and leaned both hands on the kitchen counter, head bowed. Rain pattered on the roof, steady and relentless. This wasn't inconvenience. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was warfare. Quiet, careful, but unmistakable. They hadn't barricaded a neighborhood street. They'd landlocked a man on his own land, illegal in every state, unethical everywhere, unbelievable under any circumstance. Anger rose in me, but not the shouting kind. This was deeper, like something ancient waking up, something written into the land itself. I wiped rainwater from my face and reached for my phone. Time to call Sarah, I muttered. Because if they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. A legal one. A loud one. A fight they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The call rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Remy? You okay? You sound like you fell in a river. Close enough, I said, peeling off my soaked jacket. I need your help. She paused. Tell me everything. I walked to the window overlooking the lake. Rain streaked down the glass in long, trembling lines, blurring the shoreline and the distant cabins. The storm hadn't moved on. It hovered, restless, as if waiting for the next blow. I recited every detail. The harassment, the gravel piles, the workers blocking the easement, and finally the fully installed gate. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Remy, she said slowly, voice tightening, they blocked your only legal access to your property? Yes. And they didn't give you notice? No. And they know you have an easement? Yes. Another pause, then a sharp inhale. Well, she said, shifting into the tone I remembered from her days fighting billion-dollar water disputes. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week. I let out a humorless laugh. I wish it stopped there. It gets worse? They locked me out. Keypad. No code. I had to hike home through the woods during the storm. That, she said, her voice dropping an octave, is illegal 6 different ways. Landlocking is not a gray area. It's a hard no in state and federal law. You have the easement documents, right? Right where my father left them. Good. I'm driving up tomorrow. You don't have to. I'm driving up, she repeated. But first, I'm drafting a demand letter. The rain eased for a moment, drumming lightly against the porch roof like fingertips tapping out a warning. I could almost picture Sarah at her desk in Denver, glasses perched halfway down her nose, hair pulled back, legal pads scattered around her like a general assembling battle plans. What's the letter going to say? I asked. That they have 48 hours to remove the gate, she said flatly. Or we file for an injunction, damages, and legal fees. And if they try to argue, I'll bury them in precedent. Bethany thinks the easement is obsolete, I said. Her lawyer probably will too. Sarah snorted. Obsolete? A recorded easement doesn't expire like milk, Remy. It's permanent, binding, eternal. They'd have better luck arguing the lake is imaginary. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the mountains in stark white. The thunder followed a few heartbeats later, rolling long and low and angry. Send me photos, she said. The gate, the keypad, the road, any construction debris, anything you've got. I took a few before the storm hit, I said. I'll send them now. And the easement documents. Scan everything. I walked to the old file cabinet near the dining table, the one my father used to keep maps and letters in. Even closed, it smelled, faintly, of cedar and old paper. When I pulled open the top drawer, the wood creaked like it hadn't been touched in months. Maps rustled, corners curled with age, deeds lay stacked neatly in plastic sleeves, my father's handwriting labeling each one. This land is supposed to be peaceful, I murmured. Sarah heard it. Peace is only peaceful when people respect boundaries. These people don't, but that's okay. We'll remind them. I slid the easement papers out carefully. The ink was faded in places, but the text was still sharp enough to cut through any HOA nonsense. Permanent right-of-way, non-exclusive use, grantor and grantee responsibilities, utility rights, recorded with the county, notarized, witnessed, ironclad. My father always said, if you carve a promise into paper, make sure it lasts longer than you do. He'd succeeded. I'll email everything tonight, I told Sarah. Good. And Remy? Her voice softened slightly. You did the right thing calling me. I figured you'd enjoy this, what I said. Oh, I do, she answered. HOAs are my favorite flavor of opponent. They're arrogant, loud, and always wrong. It's like shooting fish in a very annoying barrel. Despite the storm, despite the exhaustion in my bones from the hike, I cracked a smile. Tomorrow, she continued, shifting back into lawyer mode, we start by giving them a chance to clean up their mess. After that, we burn down their arguments one by one. Legally, I added. Legally, she agreed. Every fire I start has a citation. After we hung up, I spent the next hour scanning documents under the warm glow of the cabin lamp. Rain softened into a steady patter. The lake turned dark and glassy, the surface trembling with occasional gusts of wind. I could almost feel the mountain settling again, observing, listening, waiting for the next turn. Once everything was scanned, labeled, and emailed, I stepped onto the porch. The storm clouds were breaking apart, moonlight pushing through like a lantern behind torn curtains. The air smelled of wet pine and earth. I thought about Bethany, Jake, the clipboard, the way she'd said, "We did." They wanted control. They wanted compliance. They wanted to treat the mountain like an accessory, the land like wallpaper to their luxury community. But the land had a memory older than their bylaws, and I had a deed older than their entire HOA. Inside, my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. Draft complete. Sending tomorrow. Get some rest. They're not ready for what's coming. I took a breath, deep and slow, feeling something inside me shift. The anger was still there, but it had cooled, focused, solidified into something stronger. Resolve. The quiet war they'd started was about to become very loud. The next morning arrived washed clean by the storm. Mist hovered above the lake like a blanket being slowly drawn back, revealing the dark green pines and the shimmering reflection of the mountain ridge. The air felt crisp, electric, like the world had taken a long breath and was holding it for what came next. I brewed coffee, its warmth grounding me as I waited for the sound of tires on gravel. Right on cue. About 10 minutes past 9, an SUV rolled into my clearing. Silver, dusted with rain splash, nothing fancy except the woman stepping out of the driver's seat. Sarah Mitchell always walked with purpose. Long strides, no hesitation, no wasted movement. Her dark hair was tied back, her glasses perched with the kind of precision you see from surgeons or snipers. She shut the car door with a soft thud and scanned the property like the mountain itself had asked her for a legal opinion. "Morning," she said, offering a small smile. "You made good time." "Speed limits are suggestions," she replied, then held up her briefcase. "Especially when stupidity is happening somewhere." We went inside, coffee mugs steaming between us as I pulled the easement documents from the folder. She laid them out on the dining table, wood grain glowing under the morning light. She read in silence, lips pressed thin, eyes flicking quickly from line to line. After a moment, she tapped the signature block. "Your father was a smart man. He believed in paperwork the way some people believe in prayer." "Well," she said, "both come in handy during disasters." She flipped to the next page, then the next, until she reached the part I'd always skimmed past, the hand-drawn map attached to the original filing. It was yellowed at the edges, the kind of paper that looked like it belonged in a museum archive. My father's handwriting labeled each boundary: lake frontage, tree line, road path, and near the bottom, the easement corridor itself. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait," she murmured. "Is that—" She leaned closer, tracing the faint pencil lines with her fingertip. Beneath the easement road, my father had drawn thin channels marked with abbreviations: W for water, E for electricity, C for communications. Each line followed the road all the way across the lower ridge, right into what was now the HOA community. I frowned. "He mapped the utility corridor?" "Not just mapped it," she said. "He preserved the rights to it. Permanently." She flipped to the easement description again, searching through the legal language until she found the clause I'd never paid attention to. Easement includes ingress, egress, and the right to install, maintain, and use utilities, present and future, within the described corridor. Sarah exhaled a sharp laugh. "Remy, this is gold." "Explain." She straightened, shoulders lifting as if she'd just found the pressure point in a giant. "They're using your easement. I know they paved over it. The gate?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Not the road surface. Your utilities." Her voice sharpened as she gestured to the map. "See this? Your father's easement allows utility access. Water, electricity, communications. That means any line the HOA has laid under that road, any connection they've tied into the county systems through this corridor, is legally dependent on your permission. My breath caught. Are you saying? I'm saying, she cut in. The HOA's entire infrastructure may be running through your land. She let that hang there like a dropped stone. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. Not heavy, not frightening. Powerful, clarifying, like watching storm clouds split open a mountainside. She continued. That gate they installed, it didn't just block you. It jeopardized the very utilities they rely on. If this map is accurate, and it looks very accurate, they've essentially built their community on your access rights. Silence filled the cabin, thick and warm. The fireplace crackled even though I hadn't lit it. Or maybe that was just the sound of something inside me igniting. So, what now? I asked. First, she said, we verify. We're calling the power company, the water district, anyone who laid a line during that development. If they confirm the path goes under your easement, the HOA is in violation of more laws than I have shelves for. She opened her briefcase and pulled out her laptop, fingers flying across the keys. Her eyes narrowed, brows tightening in concentration. Second, she continued, we file this as an exhibit. This map changes everything. They thought they had leverage with the gate. Turns out they built their entire luxury lifestyle on a corridor they don't own. A slow grin spread across her face. The kind of grin a lawyer gets when the universe gifts them a perfect contradiction. She looked up at me. Remy, you hold the high ground here, literally and legally. The mountain breeze rustled the cabin windows, as if echoing her confidence. What about the gate? I asked. They have 48 hours to remove it. After that, we go nuclear, with paperwork, of course. And if they refuse, they won't like the consequences. Her phone buzzed then, an email notification. She glanced at the screen, and a spark lit in her eyes. That's the demand letter sent, she said. Bethany and her board should be reading it right about now. I imagined her expression as she scanned those lines. The deadlines, the citations, the threats of legal action, all written in precise, merciless language. Bethany prided herself on control, but this was one storm she couldn't manage with a clipboard and a smile. I looked down at the map again, fingertips brushing the old pencil markings. My father had drawn those lines decades before the HOA ever existed, before anyone dreamed of cabins and covenants. He'd seen the future coming and anchored our rights in ink. They rely on me, I murmured. Completely, Sarah said. And they don't know it yet. She gathered the map, slid it into a protective sleeve, and closed her case with a soft click. Then she gave me a look, steady, sharp, full of certainty. This case just went from strong to devastating. 2 days later, we found ourselves walking up the courthouse steps, early sunlight spilling across the stone columns like a spotlight waiting for the show to begin. My boots echoed against the steps. Sarah's heels clicked in sharp, steady rhythm. Every sound carried, as if the building wanted to amplify the weight of what was about to happen. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper, floor polish, and the kind of seriousness that only government buildings seem to produce. As we approached the courtroom, I caught sight of a cluster of familiar faces. HOA board members shuffled near the benches, matching polos, tight expressions, trying to appear confident, but looking more like school kids waiting outside the principal's office. And in the middle of them was Bethany Reed. Pink blazer, jaw clenched, eyes darting like she was scanning for someone to blame before the verdict even landed. When she spotted me, something flickered across her face, pride struggling with panic, control slipping beneath the surface. Jake Mercer stood beside her, arms crossed, but the usual smugness had drained from his posture. He looked like a man standing in front of a train pretending it was just another car. We took our seats. Sarah organized her files with the calm precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. Every paper clipped, every exhibit tabbed, every document exactly where she could find it without looking. Then the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. "All rise." Judge Marcus Hale entered with slow, deliberate steps. He was in his late 60s, silver hair neatly combed, glasses perched halfway down his nose, the look of someone who'd seen every kind of nonsense imaginable and refused to tolerate more. When he sat, the room fell into a hush so still you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. "Let's proceed," he said. The HOA lawyer, Spencer Walsh, stood first. Tall, expensive suit, voice like warm syrup poured over cold arrogance. "Your Honor," he began, "this case revolves around a misunderstanding. The Homeowners Association acted within the reasonable scope of its authority to preserve community safety and tranquility." He went on, hand gestures smooth, rehearsed. He spoke of evolving infrastructure needs and modern interpretation of property boundaries. He suggested, carefully but clearly, that my easement might no longer apply under current development standards. I watched the judge's expression flatten with every word. After several minutes, Spencer concluded with, "It is our position that Mr. Cole should pursue alternative access for the good of the community." Sarah waited a beat, long enough for the silence to feel heavy. Then she stood. "Your Honor, this is simple." Her voice was steady but carried enough power to stop a room mid-breath. She moved to the bench and laid down the easement document with a firm, echoing thump. "A permanent recorded easement," she said. "Unambiguous, irrevocable, binding on all future owners, including the HOA." She placed the photographs next, the gate, the keypad, the construction debris. "This association installed a barrier, intentionally, blocking the only access to my client's property, landlocking him. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a blatant violation of law." Then came the utility map, slipped forward with a small whisper of old paper. "And here," she said, her voice softening only to sharpen again, "is where the situation stops being merely illegal and becomes astonishing." The judge leaned forward. "This map shows every water line, electrical conduit, and communications cable that runs under the easement corridor. All installed by the HOA, all dependent on that easement's legality. They have blocked a road they rely on." Spencer shifted uncomfortably. Bethany stared straight ahead, face draining of color. Judge Hale tapped his pen against the bench, once, twice. Then he looked at Spencer. "Is this accurate?" Spencer hesitated. The HOA disputes the applicability of the original easement to modern infrastructure, Your Honor." "That's not my question," the judge interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Are you using utilities that run through Mr. Cole's easement?" Silence. Then a small, defeated, "Yes." A ripple ran through the courtroom, quiet gasps, shifting feet, even a muffled curse from the back row. Judge Hale set his pen down. "So your client blocked an easement while simultaneously relying on that same easement for essential services?" Spencer swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." I glanced toward Bethany. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked stunned, like someone had pulled the earth out from under her, and she was still waiting for gravity to explain itself. Sarah stepped forward again. "Your Honor, my client was forced to hike 2 miles through dangerous terrain during a storm because of this illegal blockade. He has suffered physical hardship, emotional stress, and loss of peaceful enjoyment of his property. The HOA ignored demands, ignored reason, and ignored the law." Judge Hale nodded slowly, once, twice, then looked down at the documents before him. His next words were steady, final. "Remove the gate within 24 hours." Bethany stiffened. "Failure to comply," the judge continued, "will result in a fine of $10,000 per day. Further, The HOA will compensate Mr. Cole for damages incurred and cover all attorney fees. Spencer tried to rise, perhaps to object, but the judge lifted a hand without looking up. I've heard enough. This was a blatant violation of property rights. His gavel struck the block like thunder breaking open the sky. Court adjourned. The sound echoed through the room, final and undeniable. Bethany sank into her chair. Jake looked at the floor, jaw tight. HOA board members exchanged frantic whispers. Sarah closed her briefcase with the same calm certainty she'd opened it. Small, confident movements. The precision of someone who planned the ending before the conflict even began. She nudged my arm. Congratulations. That, she said softly, was the easy part. We stepped out of the courtroom into the warm afternoon sunlight. The sky had cleared, leaving the air sharp and clean, carrying the distant scent of lake water drifting on the breeze. Traffic hummed quietly along the main road, but everything felt muted compared to the storm that had just taken place inside. Sarah slid on her sunglasses. They'll be scrambling tonight. You should get some rest and let them dig their own hole deeper. That won't take long, I said. It didn't. By the time I drove back toward the easement road, the sun had dipped low, painting the mountain in long amber strokes and turning the lake into a sheet of liquid gold. The road curved through the trees, the familiar hum of my truck mixing with birdsong and the soft rustle of wind across the branches. Then I rounded the last turn and stopped. They were all there. 3 HOA board members stood clustered around the gate, their matching shirts wrinkled, their expressions creased with anxiety. One poked at the hinges with a screwdriver, as if the gate would magically understand and unbolt itself. Another held a phone up, filming the structure like it was a crime scene he needed evidence for. The third stood with his hands on his hips, staring helplessly at the keypad. And off to the side, arms crossed, shoulders stiff, Bethany watched. Her pink blazer glowed harshly against the fading light, but her confidence was nowhere to be found. She looked like someone whose world had shifted under her feet, and she was still trying to pretend she didn't feel it. I rolled down my window just enough for her to hear me. You all look busy. Her glare could have cracked stone. You think you're clever, she snapped. I shrugged. No, I just think I know how to read legal documents. That set off a round of frantic whispers behind her. Someone muttered something about fines. Another mentioned the judge's 24-hour deadline. The youngest board member pointed helplessly to the keypad. He didn't even give us the override code, he said. Bethany whipped her head toward him. Stop talking. The youngest man flushed and shut his mouth. I didn't say anything else, just watched as they continued poking and prodding the steel frame like raccoons trying to open a locked cooler. Eventually, frustration cracked through the facade. One of them kicked a small rock, muttering under his breath. Another threw his hands up, pacing. Finally, Bethany snapped. Call the contractor. Tell him to get back here. Tonight. Tonight? One of them echoed weakly. Unless you want to pay $10,000 tomorrow morning, she hissed. That lit a fire under them. Phones came out. Voices rose. Fingers frantically tapped screens. Panic spread like wind through dry grass. I leaned back in my seat, watching quietly, feeling the subtle release of tension inside my chest. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't gloating. This was something simpler, accountability. The gate that had blocked me, the symbol of their arrogance, was suddenly too heavy for them to carry. By nightfall, a flatbed truck rumbled up the hill. Men in reflective vests climbed out, shaking their heads as they surveyed the situation. One walked up to Bethany, rubbing the back of his neck. Ma'am, this thing wasn't built to come down in pieces. We're going to have to remove the whole structure. She clenched her jaw. Fine. Just do it. Torches sparked. Tools whirred. Sparks bounced off the pavement like tiny fireflies. The metallic screech of steel being cut echoed through the valley, carrying across the lake and up the mountainside. It was a strange kind of music. Harsh, sharp, unmistakably final. From inside my truck, I watched the shadow of the gate shrinking, piece by piece, until the structure lay in chunks on the flatbed like a fallen monument. By midnight, it was gone. Not unlocked, not propped open. Gone. The posts were ground down, the keypad dangling uselessly as it was hauled away. The road stretched open again, the way it always had, the way it was always meant to be. A cold breeze slid down from the ridge, carrying the smell of cut steel and pine sap. Several homeowners had gathered on their porches to watch. Some looked embarrassed, others angry. A few just looked tired of the drama. One older man gave me a small nod, quiet but genuine, as if to say, "Good." Someone finally stood up to them. Bethany, on the other hand, stood stiff beside her board, arms crossed so tightly, I wondered if the fabric of her blazer might rip. Her face was locked into an expression midway between fury and denial. She didn't look at me when the truck carrying the destroyed gate drove past. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke loudly. They'd been warned. They hadn't listened. Now they paid the price. When I finally drove up the road, headlights sweeping across the empty posts and raw patches of concrete, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and something colder, anticipation. Because as satisfying as it was to see that gate gone, the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. People like Bethany don't break easily. They splinter, and splinters cause damage on their way out. The next morning, just as fog drifted off the lake in soft silver waves, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Not thick, not aggressive, not one of those stiff white HOA notices. This one was plain paper, folded neatly, delivered by hand. Inside, a single sentence. "We request a meeting at your earliest convenience to resolve matters amicably." Signed, Bethany Reed, HOA. President, resolve matters amicably. A phrase that tasted like fear trying to disguise itself as diplomacy. And right then, standing in the soft morning light with the letter in my hand, I knew one thing for certain. Bethany wasn't done. She was cornered. And cornered people make desperate moves. Bethany Reed, HOA President. I folded the letter slowly, letting the morning breeze catch its edges before slipping it into my jacket pocket. The lake behind me shimmered pale blue, a thin layer of mist drifting low across the surface. It was a peaceful sight, deceptively peaceful. Because underneath that stillness, the HOA was unraveling. I didn't respond right away. Not out of spite, but because silence is sometimes the strongest message you can send. Let them sit in uncertainty for a few hours. Let them feel the weight of the court order and the gate pieces hauled off like scrap metal. Let Bethany feel her grip slipping. Around noon, I drove down to the community clubhouse where the meeting was scheduled. The moment I parked, I noticed the tension rolling through the place like heat waves off asphalt. Residents walked in small clusters, whispering. A few glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Others gave me cautious nods, unsure whose side they were supposed to be on. Inside the clubhouse, the lights were too bright, the air too scented with cheap pine cleaner. Bethany sat at the center of the long conference table, hands clasped, posture stiff. Jake stood in the corner with crossed arms, trying to look supportive but mostly looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Her board members filled the chairs beside her, faces tight, papers trembling in their hands. No smiles, no small talk, just tension thick enough to chew. "Mr. Cole?" Bethany said, forcing a warm tone that cracked at the edges. "Thank you for meeting with us. I didn't agree to meet, I corrected. I agreed to listen. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, but she swallowed it. Then let's begin. She slid a folder across the table, carefully, as if the papers inside might explode. I opened it and scanned the top page. It was printed on expensive cardstock with the HOA's embossed crest. Property acquisition proposal. I blinked once. You're offering to buy my ranch? Bethany nodded stiffly. Yes. We believe it would resolve the conflict permanently. By owning the land, the HOA could transition the area into a cohesive community space, eliminating the easement complications. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She wasn't just desperate. She was scared. Real scared. What's the offer? I asked, voice calm. She straightened, trying to regain her confidence. $400,000. For a second, the room felt silent in a way that wasn't entirely natural, like the mountains outside were holding their breath just to hear my reaction. I chuckled. Not a loud laugh, not mocking, just a small, stunned breath of disbelief. My land is worth at least 3 times that, I said, even without the lake frontage. One must consider the context, she said quickly. Given the tension, the residents feel unsafe not knowing what you might do next. I shot her a look. What I might do next? Bethany, I went to court. That's what I did next. Her cheeks reddened, but she pressed on. We simply want peace, and we feel your continued ownership is destabilizing. I closed the folder. No. Her composure cracked like thin ice. You didn't even consider. I considered, I said. The answer is no. I'm not selling the land my parents built their lives on because you decided a gate would solve your control issues. Her eyes flashed. You are being unreasonable. And you're being predictable. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Bethany, maybe we should No, she snapped. Then, turning back to me, she forced another smile that looked more like a grimace. Perhaps you need time to think. We're prepared to go higher. Much higher. She slipped another page from the folder. $500,000. I didn't blink. No. Silence spread across the room like a spill. One board member muttered, "Told you this wouldn't work." Bethany ignored him. Her jaw tightened again. We're trying to find a compromise. You're trying to buy your way out of consequences. Her voice rose just slightly. You've disrupted the harmony of this community. I leaned forward. You locked a man out of his own home. Jake shifted in the corner, face tight, pretending not to hear. Bethany swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, just enough for me to notice. Then she exhaled sharply, regaining her mask of authority. This is not productive. We'll revisit. A loud noise interrupted her, chairs scraping, papers slamming, residents pouring into the meeting room from the foyer, their voices rising like a wolf. We want answers, Bethany. You cost us thousands. What else aren't you telling us? How did you not know the utilities ran under his land? You said we were safe legally. Were you lying or just incompetent? The board froze. Bethany's face drained of color. Jake stiffened. A tall man in a green flannel stepped forward. We've seen the court documents, Bethany. The judge's ruling spread like wildfire. You misled us. I absolutely did not, she began. Cut the act, another resident said. You never told us the easement was permanent. You never told us we were using his utility corridor. And you sure didn't tell us he could sue again, someone added. The room buzzed with rising anger. Then a woman near the back held up her phone. We heard the recording. Bethany's eyes widened. What recording? But she already knew. Everyone did. A contractor had leaked audio from weeks earlier, Bethany ordering the gate installed, ignoring warnings about legality, dismissing concerns about land access. It hit the room like a spark in dry brush. "That's it," someone said. "We want a vote." Another voice added, "We want a new president. Tonight." Bethany opened her mouth, but no voice came out. Her throat worked, her hands trembled, but the words failed. Jake took one small step toward her, then stopped, unsure whether to defend her or save himself. I stood quietly, watching it unfold. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. A slow, inevitable collapse of control. Sarah once said the HOA built their world on a corridor they didn't own. Now their world was cracking. Bethany grabbed her folder, clutching it like a life raft. "This meeting is adjourned. We are not voting." But the crowd surged forward, voices overlapping. "You don't decide that. You've lost our trust. Step down or we'll force a special election." She looked at me then, eyes full of something I hadn't seen before. Fear, not anger, not arrogance. Fear of losing the power she thought she was born to wield. I held her gaze for a moment, then stepped aside as the residents closed in on their failing leader. The civil war inside the HOA had begun, and there was no version of this story where Bethany walked out unscathed. The meeting unraveled into chaos. Raised voices, trembling hands, people arguing not just with Bethany, but with each other. Years of bottled frustration had burst wide open, spilling across the polished clubhouse floor like a flood that had been dammed too long. Papers waved in the air, accusations flew, chairs scraped sharply against the hardwood. Bethany tried to speak, tried to regain command of the ship she'd steered straight into a storm. But no one was listening anymore. Power had already slipped from her grasp, and she couldn't claw it back with tone or posture. I didn't linger. This wasn't my battlefield, and it wasn't my war to finish. I'd provided the truth. They were dealing with the consequences. The night air outside felt cooler than before, clearer, lighter somehow. The smell of pine and lake drifted down from the ridge, mixing with the faint hum of distant night insects. I walked to my truck, the gravel crunching gently under my boots, and watched the clubhouse windows glow with angry silhouettes. It was strange in a way. I hadn't meant to dismantle their leadership. I just wanted access to the road that legally belonged to me. Everything else, the fear, the power shift, the outrage, was just fallout from their own decisions. The next day, the announcement went out. Bethany Reed had resigned as HOA president. No flourish, no explanation. Just a short email sent to all residents at 7:12 a.m., the digital equivalent of a white flag sliding under a locked door. I heard later that she tried to frame it as a voluntary leadership transition, but the residents weren't fooled. Everyone knew what it really was. That afternoon, as clouds scattered across the mountaintops and sunlight spilled onto the lake, a softer knock sounded on my cabin door. I opened it to find Greg, the younger board member who had always looked slightly uncomfortable with the chaos around him. He held a simple white envelope, no logo, no intimidation. "We, wanted to give you this," he said quietly. I took it, and he added, "We're sorry. For all of it. We never should have let things get that far." His voice cracked around the edges, like a man apologizing for someone else's mess, but taking responsibility anyway. "I appreciate it," I said. He nodded once, stepped back, and left as quietly as he came. Inside the envelope was a formal apology from the newly formed interim board, an admission of wrongdoing, a promise of cooperation, and a statement affirming the easement as legally untouchable. It felt strange to see it on paper. Strange but good. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake caught fire with orange and gold, my phone rang. Sarah's name lit up the screen. Well, she said when I answered, her tone full of satisfaction. It's official. What's official? The damages. The court approved everything. Compensation, fees, and the injunction, permanent. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The breeze outside rustled through the pines like applause. It's over, she added. I stepped onto the porch, letting the wooden boards creak under my weight. I watched the road stretch down toward the lake, open, free, and unmarred by steel or fences. The same road my parents had traveled for decades. The same road the HOA had tried, foolishly, to erase. It's over, I repeated. But it wasn't just the victory that settled in my chest. It was something deeper. A return of dignity. A reclaiming of peace, a reminder that the land itself holds memory, and sometimes justice just needs the right moment to speak. I took a slow walk to the edge of the property. The air felt different, still cool but with a softness that had been missing for months. The lake shimmered like polished glass. The mountains stood silent, old and wise, as though approving the end of the storm. On the gravel, I found a small piece of metal, a remnant of the gate the HOA had torn down. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the rough, worn texture, once a symbol of their control. Now just scrap. As I tossed it into the bucket with other metal odds and ends, I murmured, "Not your land, not your road, not your rules." Later, when the sky deepened into a tapestry of indigo and stars, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee still warm in my hands. The quiet wrapped around me, familiar and comforting, the kind of silence only places untouched by arrogance can hold. And as I watched the last light fade behind the ridge, I found myself thinking about other people, people out there dealing with their own versions of a gate, people squeezed by rules that weren't written for them, pushed by folks who mistook kindness for weakness. I knew those people. I'd been one of them. So I asked the question not just to myself, but to anyone who'd ever lost a piece of peace and fought to reclaim it. Ever had someone try to take what's yours? I smiled softly into the night. Tell me, how far did they get? And with the lake whispering against the shore and the mountains keeping their silent watch, I knew one thing for absolute certain. The easement stood. The land stood. And so did I. If you've ever had someone push a boundary they had no right to touch, drop a simple yes in the comments. It's amazing how far a little courage and a lot of truth can carry you. Standing your ground isn't loud. Sometimes it's just steady. And if you'd like more real stories about land, dignity, and good old-fashioned justice, go ahead and subscribe. I'd love to have you here for the next one.